Hi, this is Adam Lazar, Senior Graphic Designer with CJE SeniorLife. In this video, I'm going to show you how to sew a fabric basket. I've got two baskets here and will demonstrate how to make the smaller one. To make the larger one, start with fabric that is 12 inches square. Let's begin. Let's look at the supplies. I used Aurifil cotton thread, but you could use any all-purpose thread. I also use Benzie Design Wool Felt Blend. I like it because it's pliable, but it also has structure and it allows us to keep the edges unfinished. And now for some of the tools. I'm using binder clips because I haven't bought myself Wonder Clips yet, but if you have Wonder Clips, please use them. If you don't have either, you could use pins to keep your fabric together. Some of the other tools that we're using is an acrylic quilting ruler. I have a sharp pair of scissors, a rotary cutter with a fresh blade, Microtex needles in my sewing machine. A regular ruler would be fine if you don't have a quilting ruler, and as a bonus, if you have small snips, that would be great. Couple last tools. I do have a needle for hand sewing at the end of the project. That's what's going to keep our little corner flaps down. And the final tool is going to be a friction erasable pen. You could use any marking tool that you have. I happen to like the friction when I'm not sewing apparel and I'm sewing a project like this. All right, well, let's get sewing. So the first step is to take the two pieces of fabric and line them up so they're on top of each other. We want all the raw edges and the corners to be lined up nice and neat right on top of each other. I'm going to take advantage of the grid lines on my cutting mat and my acrylic ruler by lining the ruler up against one set of lines and the fabric up against the other set. I'm holding down the acrylic ruler nice and firm, and I'm cutting straight through with my rotary cutter. Now that I have one measurement cut to 10 inches, I'm going to turn my fabric 90 degrees and line it up with the grid lines again. Doing the same thing where the fabric is lined up against one set of grid lines and the acrylic ruler is lined up against the other. Now I did want to mention that I'm using the yellow fabric as the interior of my basket and the oatmeal fabric as the exterior. Now that I have it cut down to size, we need to mark the corners. Acrylic ruler to mark 1/4 inch from the corner. I'm lining it up and using my friction erasable pen and putting that right on the corner of the acrylic ruler. Let's take a closer look. So there are 1/4 inch marks on the acrylic ruler. I'm lining those right up against the edge of the fabric, and that allows me to put my pen 1/4 inch up and 1/4 inch in from the side. Now that I have my corners marked, we need to use our clips again to keep the two pieces of fabric together. I want to run a line of clips down each of the 4 sides. So I'm starting with the first and then running down to the second, and I'll do that on all 4. When we get to the sewing machine, we're going to start at the first dot that we made and use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sewing all the way down to the next dot. We're going to land our needle right down on that dot, and that's going to allow us to pivot and turn the fabric and keep going. All right, let's hop onto the sewing machine. So I've got my fabric. I'm going to slip it underneath the pressing foot. And then I'm going to use the hand crank on the side of the machine to put that needle right on the red dot that we made. I'm going to sew a couple of stitches, and then I'm going to use the reverse stitch button so that I can lock the seams in. And I'm going to make a seam 1/4 inch down this side. I do want to point out that on my machine, there's a line that shows me exactly where a 1/4 inch would be. Now, if you don't have this mark, you can use a piece of washi tape or blue painter's tape so that your needle is 1/4 inch in from the edge of your fabric. All right, I've made it down the first side, and this is where those red dots are going to come in handy. I'm landing that needle right in the red dot, lifting the presser foot but keeping the needle down. which allows me to pivot the fabric, putting the presser foot down, and I happen to be making another 1/4 inch seam. It works out perfectly when I use these dots. I continue to do this all the way around all 4 sides until I get to the seam that I started with. Do some back stitches. Excuse my hand as I block the view. And then I'm done sewing the 2 pieces of fabric together, and we can move on to our next step. Just going to release the fabric from the machine by snipping it with my scissors, and then I'm going to head back over to my cutting mat. Now my fabric shifted just a little bit, so the yellow is peeking out from the oatmeal on this side, so I'm going to use my quilting ruler and my rotary cutter to just shave off a little bit of yellow that's peeking out. I'm going to take a look at all the sides and make sure that they're clean. Now, to create the sides, I'm going to fold the inside on top of itself. So the yellow is the interior, and I'm going to fold the whole piece so that the interior is touching itself and the exterior is exposed. I'm lining up the corners and I'm securing everything with 2 clips. Now we need to measure the sides of the basket. And we can do this in 2 different ways. I'll show you one way first, and this will work if you have a quilting ruler or a regular ruler. We need to measure up 3 inches from the bottom, and we need to measure in 3 inches from the side. So I'm just putting the 3-inch mark on the edge of the fabric and making 2 marks with my red pen. Then I'm going to use the quilting ruler diagonally to make those 2 points match up, and I'll use the red pen to connect them, just connecting the dots. Here's another way that you can do it, but this works if you have a quilting ruler. You're going to take advantage of the 45-degree line that's on the quilting ruler. That's this one right here. So instead of using the edge of the ruler to line up with the edge of the fabric, you're using the 45-degree line to line it up with the edge of the fabric, and you're putting the 2 2-inch marks where they come together with the 45-degree line. That's how you're going to make your mark. So we head back over to the machine, and instead of using a 1/4 inch seam allowance this time, we're going to sew directly on top of the mark that we made, the line that we made. So I'll make a couple of stitches with the hand crank first, back stitch to lock in the seam, and then I'm going to sew all the way down, and I'm going to be sure to make a back stitch. At this point I'm doing the other side, and now that I've done my back stitch, I've got side 1 and side 2 finished. We're back at the cutting mat, and now I'll show you how to do side 3 and 4. And I'm going to go over the quilting ruler 45-degree line method of making the marks again. So we want to line up our corners, make sure that they're nice and even, matched right where they need to be. We'll use the binder clips to keep them together, and then we'll go back to that 45-degree line on the quilting ruler. I'm going to flatten out my fabric a bit, line up that 45-degree mark, and the point of the piece, the fabric, that's going to be right where the 2 2-inch marks come together with the 45-degree line. They all come together at the same point. So now that I've sewn the 3rd and the 4th side, I'm going to trim off these corners. The quilting ruler has a 1/4 inch line that runs parallel to the edge of the ruler. So if I line that up on top of the seam that I just sewed, then I can use my rotary cutter to cut off the excess fabric, and I end up with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we're almost done. I'm just going to press down these triangular flaps. I'm going to use my iron on a medium setting, and after I do that, I'm going to use some binder clips to keep each one in place while the fabric cools down and I get my needle ready. I've threaded my needle with the same thread that I was using in my sewing machine. After I remove all these binder clips, I'll show you how to tack the triangular flaps down so that they stay attached to the body of the basket. I'm going to run my needle straight through the corner where the two seams meet on the outside of the triangular flap. I'm going to push through and go all the way through to the inside of the basket. Now, I don't have a knot on the end of my thread. I'm pulling the needle through, and I want to be careful that I don't pull the thread all the way through the body of the basket, but I do want it to come through the triangular flap. So I'm just pulling that through, leaving it on the outside of the body of the basket. And then when we look inside the basket and we see where the thread came out, that's where I'm going to go back in to the other side, coming out through the basket, through the front of the triangular flap. And because I'm following that first stitch that I made, I should end up right on the seam that was sewn by the machine, and I have. Because there's no knot on the end of my thread, I'm keeping that in place with my finger on my non-dominant hand. I want to hold on to that because there's no knot, and I purposely don't want a knot, and you'll see why I'm doing that at the end. So I'm going to make about 5 or 6 stitches going back and forth, pretty much in the same place, sort of in the same way that you might attach a button to a piece of clothing. So now that that's done, I'm going to go back through the triangular flap, but I will not go through the body of the basket. I'm just going through the flap. And bring the needle all the way through. I'm going to pull the needle off the thread. It's a pretty long thread, so I'm going to clip off a little bit of the excess. So I have enough to tie a knot with, but not too much to get in my way. And you'll see now when I make this knot and I tighten it up, it's going to slide right behind the triangular flap. And that's why I didn't put a knot in the thread to begin with. So I can make this knot and it's nice and hidden. And take my little snips and cut the thread off right at the base where the knot is, and that is it. Our basket is done. So I have 2 baskets to show you, and I'm just going to clean this up, make sure there's no hanging threads. I want to point out that the difference in size between the blue basket and the oatmeal basket is just that I started off with a 12-inch square for the blue basket and a 10-inch square for the oatmeal basket. However, the side seams that we made to create the height of the basket, those are the same. It's just this piece of fabric that you start with that makes the difference. Well, thanks for joining me today, and I hope you end up making a couple of these baskets for all of your stuff.